The sound of Paula's yoga bag hitting our marble entryway echoed through our glass and steel home like a declaration of war. I looked up from my laptop, where I'd been reviewing commercial property assessments, the numbers blurring as my wife breezed past me with that particular brand of casual indifference she'd perfected over the past few months. "Don't wait up," she called over her shoulder, already halfway to our bedroom. "I'll be at Rob's all weekend. He needs emotional support." I set down my coffee mug with deliberate precision. Emotional support. "His divorce is getting messy," Paula continued, her voice drifting from upstairs. "Someone needs to be there for him." The irony wasn't lost on me. Rob Brooks, her ex-boyfriend from college, the silver-tongued yoga instructor who'd somehow weaseled his way back into our lives 6 months ago. The same Rob who'd convinced Paula to expand her studio, to trust him with marketing advice, to spend every Saturday and Sunday at his vintage brownstone in the Arts District. I'm Derek Lawson, 44 years old, and I appraise commercial real estate for a living. My job requires attention to detail, pattern recognition, and an ability to spot when something doesn't add up. The numbers in my marriage had stopped adding up months ago. Paula appeared at the top of our floating staircase, overnight bag in hand, wearing the new perfume she'd started favoring, something expensive and entirely unlike the subtle lavender she'd worn for the past decade. Her yoga clothes were designer now, form-fitting in ways that seemed less about flexibility and more about presentation. "You're being insecure again," she said, descending the stairs with practiced grace. At 41, Paula still moved like the dancer she'd been in college, all fluid lines and calculated positioning. "Rob is going through a difficult time. As his friend, I feel obligated to help." Friend. The word hung in the air like incense at her studio, cloying and artificial. "Of course," I replied, my voice maintaining the same neutral tone I used when delivering unfavorable property assessments. "How long has this emotional support been going on?" Paula paused at the bottom of the stairs, her green eyes flashing with something between annoyance and guilt. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Just curious about the timeline, for my own emotional support." She rolled her eyes, a gesture that had become her default response to any question that required actual honesty. "Don't be dramatic, Derek. It's not attractive." I watched her check her reflection in the hallway mirror, adjusting her hair and applying lip gloss with the kind of care usually reserved for first dates. The shared health app on my phone, the one we'd synced 2 years ago during her wellness kick, had been pinging her location at the same address every weekend for the past 3 months. Rob's address, according to the property records I'd quietly pulled. "Will you be doing any actual yoga at these emotional support sessions?" I asked. "Of course. Rob's been helping me develop new sequences for the studio." "At his house." "He has a beautiful home studio. Very inspiring." I nodded, making a mental note to check our credit card statements for yoga equipment purchases. In my experience, lies always left paper trails. Paula kissed my cheek, a brief, perfunctory gesture that felt more like marking territory than affection. "Try not to overthink everything while I'm gone. Maybe call Jake and watch the game." Jake Morrison was my colleague and closest friend, an ex-military guy who'd transitioned into commercial real estate after his service. He had a talent for reading people that complemented my skill with numbers. More importantly, he had zero tolerance for bullshit. "Have fun with your emotional support," I said as Paula headed for the door. She paused, hand on the handle. "Derek?" "Yeah? This jealousy thing isn't healthy. You might want to consider talking to someone." The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving me alone in our minimalist living room with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the polished concrete floors, and for a moment I felt the weight of the silence. But silence, I'd learned, was often more revealing than words. I opened my laptop and pulled up our shared credit card account. 3 charges at Rob's neighborhood bistro in the past 2 weeks. 2 purchases at an upscale lingerie boutique I'd never heard of, a wine delivery to an address that wasn't ours. My phone buzzed with a notification from the health app. Paula's location had updated. She was at Rob's house, just as I'd expected. I screenshot the notification, adding it to a folder I'd been quietly building for the past month. Evidence, my appraiser's mind called it. Documentation of a pattern that was becoming impossible to ignore. The thing about commercial real estate is that every property tells a story. Location, condition, market value, potential, all of it adds up to a narrative about what something is really worth. My marriage, it seemed, was a property in serious decline. I poured myself a scotch and settled back into my chair. If Paula wanted to play games, she'd picked the wrong opponent. I'd built my career on uncovering the truth behind carefully constructed facades. Time to do some appraising of my own. Monday morning arrived with the kind of gray drizzle that made our coastal city look like a noir film. I sat in my office on the 15th floor of the Meridian building, watching the harbor through rain-streaked windows while Jake nursed his 3rd cup of coffee and listened to my weekend update. "So, she's not even hiding it anymore," Jake said, his weathered face creased with concern. At 46, Jake had the kind of steady presence that came from years of military service and dealing with difficult clients. His graying hair was always perfectly trimmed, and his suits were pressed with military precision. "Hiding would imply shame," I replied, scrolling through the weekend's credit card activity on my tablet. Paula's moved past shame into full entitlement mode. "What's the damage this time?" I turned the tablet toward him. "Dinner for 2 at Chez Laurent. That's $150 a head minimum. Breakfast at the Riverside Cafe Sunday morning. And this." I pointed to a charge that had appeared yesterday evening. "A couples massage at the Serenity Spa." Jake's eyebrows rose. "Couples massage. For emotional support, apparently." "Right." Jake leaned back in his chair, studying me with the same intensity he'd once used to assess potential threats in Afghanistan. "So, what's your play here?" That was the question I'd been wrestling with all weekend. The old Derek might have confronted Paula directly, demanded explanations, made ultimatums. But the old Derek hadn't understood that he was married to someone capable of such calculated deception. "I need more information," I said. "About Rob, about what Paula thinks she's getting out of this arrangement, about what endgame she has in mind." "You want me to run a background check on this guy?" "Already did." I pulled up a file on my laptop. Rob Brooks, 43, divorced yoga instructor and part-time life coach, owns the brownstone outright, inherited it from his grandmother. No mortgage, minimal debt, but also minimal legitimate income. He's been living off his divorce settlement and whatever cash his private yoga sessions bring in. Private sessions. That's what he calls them on his website. Personalized wellness experiences for discerning clients. Jake snorted. "Sounds like a high-end escort service with better branding." I'd had the same thought. Rob's website was all soft lighting and spiritual buzzwords, but the pricing structure suggested services that went beyond traditional yoga instruction. $500 for a weekend intensive, $1,000 for a week-long personal transformation package. "Here's what's interesting," I continued, pulling up another document. "Rob's divorce was finalized 8 months ago, but according to public records, his ex-wife never moved out of their shared address." Jake leaned forward. "He's still married?" "Legally divorced, but Nina Brooks, that's the ex-wife, still lists his address as her primary residence for tax purposes. She's a marketing consultant, pulls in about $200,000 a year, significantly more than Rob's yoga hustle brings in. So either she's subsidizing his lifestyle or they're not as divorced as they want people to believe." I'd spent Sunday evening diving deep into public records, social media profiles, and business registrations. The picture that emerged was of a man who'd built his entire identity around being available to lonely, affluent women seeking something their marriages couldn't provide. Rob specialized in emotional intimacy with a spiritual veneer, The perfect combination for someone like Paula, who'd been feeling increasingly disconnected from our practical, numbers-focused relationship. "What about Paula's studio?" Jake asked. "Any financial irregularities there?" That's where it gets interesting. I pulled up another set of documents. 3 months ago, Paula took out a business loan to expand the studio. $50,000 secured against our house. Jake's expression darkened. "She didn't discuss this with you?" "I found the paperwork in her filing cabinet yesterday. The loan application lists Rob as a business consultant and references his expertise in yoga studio management." "Does he have that expertise?" "His last venture was a meditation retreat center in Sedona that went bankrupt within 6 months." We sat in silence for a moment, watching the rain streak down the windows. The harbor looked gray and choppy, matching my mood. "Derek," Jake said finally, "you know where this is heading, right?" I did. The pattern was becoming clear. Paula wasn't just having an affair, she was being systematically manipulated by someone who made his living exploiting vulnerable women. The question was whether she was a willing participant or just another mark. My phone buzzed with a text from Paula. "Running late tonight. Don't wait dinner." I showed Jake the message. "She's supposed to be at the studio until 8 on Mondays. Want me to drive by, see if her car's there?" "No need." I opened the health app and showed him Paula's location. She was at Rob's house again, less than 24 hours after returning from her weekend of emotional support. "Jesus," Jake muttered. "She's not even trying to maintain plausible deniability." That was what bothered me most. Paula had always been careful, calculated. Her sudden carelessness suggested either complete confidence in my passivity or complete indifference to my feelings. Neither option spoke well for our marriage's future. "I need to talk to Nina Brooks," I said. Jake raised an eyebrow. "The ex-wife?" "If Rob's running some kind of long-term con, she might be willing to share information, especially if she's been burned by him before. Or she might warn him that you're sniffing around. That's a risk I'll have to take." I pulled up Nina's LinkedIn profile. She was attractive in a sharp, professional way. Dark hair, intelligent eyes, the kind of polished confidence that came from success in a competitive field. Her company specialized in digital marketing for lifestyle brands, with an impressive client roster that included several high-end wellness companies. "She's smart," I said, showing Jake the profile. "And successful. If Rob fooled her once, she probably doesn't want it happening again. How are you going to approach her?" I smiled for the first time in days. "I'm going to tell her the truth, that I think her ex-husband is running a scam and my wife might be his next victim." Jake nodded slowly. "That could work, or it could blow up in your face." "Everything's already blown up," I said, closing the laptop. "I'm just trying to control the damage." Outside, the rain was picking up, turning the harbor into a gray blur. Somewhere across the city, my wife was spending another evening providing emotional support to a man who specialized in exploiting that kindness. Time to even the playing field. Nina Brooks agreed to meet me at Meridian Coffee, a neutral location downtown that offered both privacy and public safety. I arrived early, choosing a corner table that provided a clear view of the entrance, while keeping our conversation away from potential eavesdroppers. She walked in exactly on time, and I recognized her immediately from her LinkedIn photos. Nina had the kind of presence that commanded attention. Confident stride, designer coat, the subtle but expensive accessories that marked her as someone who'd earned her success. Her dark hair was pulled back in a professional chignon, and her green eyes swept the cafe with the practiced assessment of someone accustomed to reading rooms and people. I stood as she approached. "Ms. Brooks?" "Nina, please." Her handshake was firm, her smile polite but guarded. "And you're Derek Lawson, the commercial appraiser. Thank you for meeting with me." She settled into the chair across from me, declining my offer of coffee with a slight shake of her head. "Your message was intriguing. You mentioned concerns about Rob's current business practices? I'd been careful in my initial contact, reaching out through her company's website and presenting myself as someone interested in her marketing services while expressing concerns about a mutual acquaintance's business ethics. It was a delicate balance, enough truth to pique her interest without revealing the full scope of my situation. I think my wife is being manipulated by your ex-husband, I said, deciding that directness was my best strategy. Nina's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. I see. And what makes you think that? She's been spending every weekend at his house for the past 3 months, ostensibly providing emotional support during your divorce proceedings. She's also convinced our bank to approve a $50,000 business loan with Rob listed as a consultant, despite his track record of failed ventures. Nina was quiet for a long moment, her fingers drumming silently against the table. When she spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. How much do you know about Rob's methods? I know he specializes in private yoga sessions for affluent women. I know he presents himself as recently divorced and emotionally available. And I know that according to public records, you never actually moved out of his house. A smile ghosted across Nina's lips, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. You've done your homework. It's what I do for a living. Assess properties, identify discrepancies, determine actual value versus perceived value. And what's your assessment of Rob's actual value? I think he's a con artist with a yoga certification. Nina laughed, a short, sharp sound that held no humor. That's remarkably accurate, though you're missing a few details. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through what appeared to be a photo album. Rob and I aren't divorced, Mr. Lawson. We're separated and have been for 2 years. The divorce proceedings are real, but they're also deliberately protracted. Why? Because Rob discovered that playing the role of the wounded, recently divorced spiritual teacher is remarkably profitable. Women like your wife are drawn to the combination of vulnerability and wisdom. They want to heal him, to be the one who helps him trust again. She turned her phone toward me, showing a series of photos that looked like they'd been taken with a telephoto lens. Rob with different women at restaurants, at his house, at various yoga studios around the city. All of them appeared to be in their late 30s or early 40s, all well-dressed and obviously affluent. How many? I asked. Currently, 3 regulars, including your wife. Over the past 2 years, I've documented 17 different women who've provided Rob with financial support, emotional labor, or both. The scope of it was staggering. And you've been tracking this why? Because I'm building a case for our divorce proceedings. Rob thinks he's been clever about hiding assets and income, but every gift, every loan, every business investment his girlfriends make creates a paper trail. When we finally divorce, I want to ensure he can't claim poverty while he's been living off other women's generosity. I felt a grudging respect for Nina's strategic thinking. She'd turned her husband's infidelity into a long-term intelligence-gathering operation. What about the women? I asked. Do they know about each other? Rob is very careful about scheduling and compartmentalization. Your wife probably believes she's his only source of support. The others likely believe the same thing. Jesus. Nina studied me for a moment. What are you planning to do with this information? It was a fair question. The old Derek would have confronted Paula immediately, demanded she end the relationship, tried to repair the damage through communication and counseling. But the old Derek hadn't understood the depth of the deception involved. I'm going to expose him, I said. Publicly, comprehensively, and in a way that ensures he can't just move on to the next group of victims. That's an admirable goal. But Rob is very good at managing his image and deflecting blame. The women he targets often become protective of him, even when presented with evidence of his deception. Then I need to make the evidence impossible to ignore. Nina leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. What did you have in mind? There's an industry gala next Friday, the Coastal Business Association's annual fundraiser. Paula's yoga studio is a member, and she'll be there with her business partners. It's the kind of event where reputation matters, where public perception can make or break professional relationships. You want to confront them publicly? I want to create a situation where the truth becomes undeniable, where Paula has to choose between continuing to enable Rob's deception and salvaging her professional reputation. Nina was quiet for several minutes, her green eyes studying my face with the intensity of someone accustomed to making high-stakes decisions. "I could help with that," she said finally. "How?" "Rob will be at that gala. He's been cultivating several potential new clients among the association members. If you and I were to arrive together as a couple, it would create some interesting dynamics." The audacity of the plan was appealing. "You'd be willing to do that?" "Mr. Lawson, Derek, I've spent 2 years documenting my husband's systematic exploitation of vulnerable women. I've watched him drain their bank accounts, manipulate their emotions, and discard them when they're no longer useful. If there's an opportunity to end his operation while securing evidence for my divorce case, I'm very interested." I felt something shift inside me, a sense of purpose I hadn't experienced since discovering Paula's betrayal. For months, I'd been reactive, trying to understand and cope with my wife's infidelity. Now, for the first time, I had the opportunity to be proactive. "What would you need from me?" I asked. "Complete honesty about your wife's involvement with Rob. Financial records, communication logs, anything that demonstrates the scope of their relationship. In exchange, I'll provide you with everything I've gathered on Rob's other victims and his methods of operation." "And at the gala?" "We present a united front. 2 people who've discovered the truth about Rob Brooks and decided to take action. Your wife will have to choose between standing by a man she discovers is married and systematically deceiving multiple women, or cutting her losses and trying to salvage her reputation." I extended my hand across the table. "Partners?" Nina shook it, her grip firm and confident. "Partners, but Derek?" "Yeah. When this is over, Rob's going to be finished in this city. Are you prepared for the possibility that your marriage might be collateral damage?" I thought about Paula's casual dismissal of my concerns, her increasing absence from our home, the way she'd mortgaged our house to fund Rob's latest scheme. "My marriage is already over," I said. "I'm just tired of being the only one who doesn't know it." Nina smiled, and this time it was genuine. "Then let's make sure everyone else knows it too." The Coastal Business Association's annual fundraiser was held at the Harbor View Hotel, a restored Art Deco building that overlooked the marina. The ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and the kind of understated wealth that characterized our city's business elite. I'd attended these events for years, usually as Paula's dutiful spouse, making small talk about property values and market trends while she networked with potential yoga clients. Tonight was different. Nina arrived at my house at 6:30, looking stunning in a black cocktail dress that managed to be both elegant and subtly provocative. She'd agreed to play the role of my date, and she looked the part perfectly. Successful, confident, and completely at ease with the deception we were about to perpetrate. "Ready for this?" she asked as I helped her into my car. "I've been ready for months," I replied. "I just didn't know what I was getting ready for." The drive to the hotel gave us time to review our strategy. Nina had provided me with a comprehensive dossier on Rob's activities, including photos, financial records, and testimonials from 2 of his previous victims who'd agreed to speak about their experiences. The evidence was damning, but we needed to present it in a way that would maximize impact while minimizing legal exposure. "Remember," Nina said as we pulled into the hotel's valet area, "the goal isn't to destroy your wife. It's to expose Rob and give Paula an opportunity to make an informed choice about her future. And if she chooses Rob, then she'll be choosing to align herself with a known predator, and the consequences will be hers to bear." The ballroom was already crowded when we arrived, filled with the usual mix of business owners, city council members, and social climbers that characterized these events. I spotted Paula immediately. She was near the bar, wearing the emerald green dress I'd bought her for our anniversary 2 years ago. She was deep in conversation with Amber Reeves and Sienna Walsh, her business partners at the yoga studio. "There," I murmured to Nina, nodding toward Paula's group. Nina followed my gaze, her expression cool and professional. "And Rob?" I scanned the room and found him near the silent auction tables, schmoozing with Margaret Chen, who owned a chain of high-end spas. Rob was in his element, charming, attentive, radiating the kind of spiritual confidence that his target demographic found irresistible. By the auction tables, tall guy with the man bun talking to Margaret Chen. Nina studied him for a moment. He's exactly what I expected. Handsome enough to be attractive, spiritual enough to seem deep, but with that underlying neediness that makes women want to rescue him. Is that what drew you to him originally? I was 25 and thought I could change him, Nina said with a rueful smile. Youth makes fools of us all. We made our entrance slowly, stopping to chat with colleagues and acquaintances while gradually working our way toward Paula's group. I could feel eyes following us. Nina was striking enough to draw attention, and our pairing was unexpected enough to generate curiosity. Paula noticed us when we were still 20 feet away. I watched her face cycle through confusion, recognition, and something approaching panic as she realized who my companion was. "Derek?" Paula's voice carried across the space between us, pitched just loud enough to draw attention from nearby conversations. I guided Nina toward them, my hand resting lightly on her back in a gesture that suggested intimacy without being inappropriate. "Paula, you look lovely tonight." Paula's green eyes darted between Nina and me, her professional smile wavering slightly. "I didn't expect to see you here. The association sent a reminder about the gala last week. I thought it might be nice to attend for once." I turned to Nina with what I hoped was a convincing smile. "Paula, I'd like you to meet Nina Brooks. Nina, my wife Paula." The introduction hung in the air like a challenge. Paula clearly recognized the name, but she was struggling to place the context. Amber and Sienna had gone quiet, their attention focused on our little drama with the intensity of reality TV viewers. "Brooks," Paula repeated slowly. "That name sounds familiar." "You might know my husband," Nina said, her voice perfectly pleasant. "Rob Brooks? I believe you've been providing him with emotional support during our divorce proceedings." The color drained from Paula's face. Around us, I could feel the subtle shift in attention that occurred when social drama began to unfold at these events. Nothing drew a crowd like the promise of public humiliation among the city's elite. "Your husband?" Paula's voice was barely above a whisper. "Well, technically my estranged husband," Nina clarified. "We've been separated for 2 years, though the divorce has been complicated. Rob has found it difficult to maintain financial independence during the process." I watched Paula's mind work through the implications. The emotional support, the business loan, the weekends at Rob's house, all of it took on a different meaning when viewed through the lens of Nina's revelation. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Paula said, her voice gaining strength as she shifted into damage control mode. "Rob told me he was divorced, that he was struggling to rebuild his life after a difficult separation." "Oh, Rob is definitely struggling," Nina agreed. "But not in the way he's led you to believe." She pulled out her phone and scrolled to a photo album I'd seen earlier. These were taken over the past 6 months, Rob with various clients who've been helping him through his emotional difficulties. Paula stared at the screen, her face cycling through a range of emotions as she recognized the pattern Nina was revealing. Other women, other weekends, other sources of emotional and financial support. "This can't be right," Paula whispered. "I'm afraid it is," Nina said gently. "Rob has become quite skilled at identifying women who are feeling unfulfilled in their current relationships. He offers them the kind of spiritual and emotional connection they're craving, along with the satisfaction of helping someone in need. It's remarkably effective. Amber leaned in to look at the photos, her eyes widening as she recognized the scope of Rob's operation. Paula, did you know about this? Of course she didn't, I said, stepping closer to my wife. Paula's been manipulated just like the others. The question now is what she's going to do with this information. Paula looked up at me, her eyes bright with unshed tears. For a moment, I saw the woman I'd married 15 years ago, vulnerable, confused, seeking guidance from someone she trusted. Derek, Paula! Rob's voice cut through our conversation like a blade. He was approaching rapidly, his usual spiritual calm replaced by barely controlled panic. He'd obviously spotted Nina and realized that his carefully constructed world was about to collapse. Rob, Nina said pleasantly, I was just telling Paula about our marriage. She seemed surprised to learn that we're still legally wed. Rob's eyes darted between Nina and Paula, his mind clearly racing through damage control scenarios. Nina, what are you doing here? I'm attending a business function with Derek, Nina replied. We've become quite close while comparing notes about your various relationships. The crowd around us had grown larger, drawn by the promise of drama among people they recognized. I could see Margaret Chen watching from across the room, her phone in her hand, as if she was considering whether this moment warranted documentation. This is a private matter, Rob said, his voice tight with controlled anger. Actually, I said, it's becoming quite public, just like Paula's business loan application, which lists you as a consultant, despite your track record of failed ventures. Rob's face went pale. You don't understand the situation. I understand it perfectly, I replied. You've been running a long-term con, targeting vulnerable women and exploiting their desire to help someone in need. My wife was just your latest mark. That's not true, Paula said, but her voice lacked conviction. Nina turned to face her directly. Paula, how much money have you given Rob over the past 3 months? It wasn't like that. The business loan alone was $50,000, I said. Plus dinners, spa treatments, weekend getaways. I'd estimate you've invested close to $70,000 in Rob's emotional recovery. The number hung in the air like an accusation. Around us, I could hear the subtle murmur of conversation as word of the confrontation spread through the ballroom. Rob needed help, Paula said weakly. Rob needed money, Nina corrected, and he's very good at making women believe that providing it is an act of love rather than enablement. Rob stepped forward, his spiritual facade finally cracking completely. This is ridiculous. Paula and I have a genuine connection. Just because you're bitter about our separation doesn't mean— Our separation? Nina laughed, the sound sharp and cutting. Rob, we've been living in the same house for 2 years. We share a mortgage, a bank account, and a tax return. The only thing we don't share anymore is a bed. The revelation hit Paula like a physical blow. She staggered slightly, her hand reaching out to steady herself against a nearby table. That's impossible, she whispered. Check the property records, I said gently. Nina Brooks and Rob Brooks, joint owners of 1247 Maple Street, the same address where you've been spending your weekends. Paula turned to Rob, her face a mask of betrayal and dawning comprehension. You lied to me. Paula, I can explain. You lied to me, she repeated, her voice growing stronger. About everything. Your marriage, your finances, your other women, everything. The crowd around us had grown silent, everyone straining to hear the climax of the drama unfolding before them. I could see Amber and Sienna exchanging glances, clearly calculating the potential damage to their business partnership. Paula, Rob said, reaching for her arm. If we could just talk privately? Don't touch me. Paula jerked away from him, her voice carrying clearly across the ballroom. Don't ever touch me again. She turned to face me, her eyes bright with tears and something that might have been respect. Derek, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know, I said simply. Paula looked around at the crowd of faces watching her, at her business partner's expressions of concern and calculation, at the man who'd been systematically deceiving her for months. I need to go, she said. We'll talk tomorrow, I replied. When you're ready. Paula nodded and walked toward the exit, her head held high despite the whispers that followed in her wake. Rob started to follow her, but Nina's voice stopped him cold. Robert. He turned back to face his wife, his expression desperate. Your things will be packed and waiting on the front porch tomorrow morning, Nina said. The locks will be changed by noon. If you attempt to contact any of the women in those photographs, I'll be filing charges for fraud and extortion. You can't, I can, and I will. My attorney has been very thorough in documenting your activities. The only question now is whether you leave quietly or whether this becomes a criminal matter. Rob looked around at the crowd of faces watching his humiliation, at the phones that were undoubtedly recording his downfall, at the complete collapse of the life he'd built on lies and manipulation. Without another word, he turned and walked away, his spiritual confidence finally and completely shattered. Nina turned to me with a smile that was both triumphant and exhausted. Well, that went better than I expected. Thank you, I said, for everything. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to end this charade once and for all. Around us, the crowd was beginning to disperse, the immediate drama concluded, but the gossip just beginning. I knew that by tomorrow morning, Rob's reputation in the city would be completely destroyed, and Paula would be facing some difficult questions about her judgment and business practices. But for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe freely. The truth, as they say, had set us all free. 3 weeks after the gala, I sat in my office reviewing the final paperwork for what had become the most complex property assessment of my career, the dissolution of my own marriage. Paula had moved out of our house the morning after the confrontation, taking only her personal belongings and leaving behind 15 years of shared history. The yoga studio had been another casualty. Amber and Sienna had moved quickly to distance themselves from the scandal, buying out Paula's share at a significant discount and rebranding the business to remove any association with the Rob Brooks debacle. Paula's reputation in the local wellness community was effectively finished. Jake knocked on my office door, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the expression of someone who'd been monitoring a developing situation. Thought you might want to see this, he said, handing me a newspaper folded to the business section. The headline read, Local Yoga Instructor Faces Fraud Charges in Multi-Victim Scheme. Below it was a photo of Rob being led away in handcuffs, his spiritual composure finally and completely shattered. Nina's attorney was thorough, Jake observed, settling into the chair across from my desk. I scanned the article, noting the details that painted a comprehensive picture of Rob's operation. 17 victims over 2 years, nearly $500,000 in fraudulent loans and gifts, and a pattern of emotional manipulation that had destroyed multiple marriages and relationships. Any word on Paula? Jake asked. She's staying with her sister in Portland. Her attorney called yesterday to discuss the final settlement terms. The divorce had proceeded with surprising efficiency. Paula, faced with the reality of her situation and the public humiliation of her poor judgment, had agreed to a straightforward division of assets. She'd kept her car and personal belongings, I'd kept the house and my retirement accounts. The business loan she'd secured against our home had been her responsibility to resolve. How are you holding up? It was a fair question. 3 weeks ago, I'd been a married man trying to save a relationship that had been fading for months. Now I was single, living alone in a house that felt simultaneously empty and liberated. Better than I expected, I said honestly. It's strange how much energy was being drained by pretending everything was normal. My phone buzzed with a text message. Nina. Dinner tonight to celebrate Rob's arrest? I'm buying. I showed Jake the message. Nina Brooks wants to celebrate. The ex-wife turned ally? I like her. She's got steel. Nina had become an unexpected constant in my life over the past few weeks. What had started as a strategic alliance had evolved into something resembling friendship, built on mutual respect and shared experience with deception. She was intelligent, funny, and refreshingly direct. Qualities I'd forgotten I valued until Paula's manipulation had made honesty seem revolutionary. "Are you going to go?" Jake asked. "Probably. She's good company. And attractive. And recently separated from a sociopathic con artist, just like me." Jake grinned. "So perfect timing, then." I laughed, realizing it was the first time I'd felt genuinely amused in months. Something like that. My computer chimed with an email notification. The sender was Paula, the first direct communication I'd received from her since she'd left. "Derek," the message read, "I know an apology is inadequate for what I put you through, but I want you to know that I understand now how completely I was manipulated. Rob made me feel like I was saving him, like I was the only person who truly understood his pain. I see now that was exactly what he wanted me to feel. I'm starting therapy to understand how I became so vulnerable to that kind of manipulation. I hope someday you can forgive me, even if you can't forget. I'm sorry for everything. Paula." I read the message twice, then forwarded it to Jake. "Sounds genuine," he said after reviewing it. "It probably is, but it's also 3 weeks too late." The truth was that Paula's apology, while appreciated, couldn't undo the months of lies and manipulation. More importantly, it couldn't restore the trust that had been the foundation of our marriage. Even if Rob had never entered the picture, Paula's willingness to mortgage our home without discussion, to dismiss my concerns as insecurity, and to prioritize her own emotional needs over our relationship had revealed fundamental incompatibilities I couldn't ignore. Are you going to respond? Eventually, when I figure out what to say. My office phone rang, interrupting our conversation. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. "Derek Lawson." "Mr. Lawson, this is Margaret Chen. We met briefly at the Business Association gala." I remembered her, the spa owner who'd been talking to Rob when Nina and I had arrived. "Of course. What can I do for you?" "I wanted to thank you for exposing Rob Brooks. I'd been considering hiring him as a consultant for my wellness centers. If you hadn't revealed his true nature, I might have made a very expensive mistake." "I'm glad we could prevent that. I'm calling because I have a business proposition for you. My company is expanding, and we need someone to handle property assessments and acquisitions. Your reputation for thoroughness and integrity has impressed several people I trust. Would you be interested in discussing a consulting arrangement?" The offer was unexpected but appealing. My current firm was solid but limiting. This could be an opportunity to expand my practice while working with clients who valued the same attention to detail that had helped expose Rob's deception. "I'd be very interested in discussing that," I said. "Excellent. Are you free for lunch tomorrow?" After finalizing the details with Margaret, I hung up and turned to Jake. Looks like the Rob Brooks situation might have some unexpected benefits. "How so?" I explained Margaret's offer, watching Jake's expression shift from surprise to approval. "That's a significant opportunity," he said. "Margaret Chen's company has been expanding aggressively. A consulting contract with them could set you up for years." It's ironic. Paula's betrayal led me to Nina. Nina helped me expose Rob, and exposing Rob has apparently enhanced my professional reputation. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us create opportunities we never would have pursued otherwise. I thought about that as I watched the harbor through my office window. 3 weeks ago, I'd been trapped in a marriage with someone who'd lost respect for me, working a job that felt increasingly routine, and accepting a life that had slowly contracted around my own passivity. Now I was single, professionally ascending, and genuinely excited about the future for the first time in years. My phone buzzed with another text from Nina. "Also, I have news about Rob's other victims. Several of them want to thank you personally for exposing him. Turns out you're something of a local hero. I smiled and typed back, "Dinner sounds perfect. I'll pick you up at 7. Jake raised an eyebrow. "Local hero, huh?" "Apparently." "How does it feel?" I considered the question seriously. 3 weeks ago, I'd been Derek Lawson, the cuckolded husband who'd been too passive to recognize his wife's betrayal. Now I was Derek Lawson, the man who'd systematically exposed a predator and helped multiple women escape a dangerous situation. "It feels like I finally understand what I'm capable of," I said. Jake nodded approvingly. "About time." Outside my office window, the harbor sparkled in the afternoon sun. Somewhere across the city, Rob Brooks was sitting in a jail cell, his carefully constructed life in ruins. Paula was in Portland, beginning the difficult work of understanding how she'd become so vulnerable to manipulation. And I was sitting in my office, fielding job offers and planning dinner with an intelligent, attractive woman who'd proven herself to be both trustworthy and formidable. For the first time in months, the future looked bright. I picked up my phone and called Nina. "Change of plans for tonight," I said when she answered. "Oh?" "Instead of just celebrating Rob's arrest, let's celebrate new beginnings." Her laugh was warm and genuine. "I like that idea much better." As I hung up the phone, I realized that Jake was right. Sometimes, the worst things that happened to us created opportunities we never would have pursued otherwise. Paula's betrayal had forced me to rediscover parts of myself I'd forgotten: the investigator, the strategist, the man who refused to accept defeat. Rob Brooks had thought he was exploiting vulnerable people for his own gain. Instead, he'd inadvertently created the circumstances for his own destruction and my liberation. The appraiser's reckoning was complete.